The champagne glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club, as my brother-in-law's voice cut through the celebration like a blade. Patricia? She's nobody important. Just ride on our family's coattails. The entire room fell silent, 50 pairs of eyes turning toward me as I stood frozen in my simple black dress, watching the golden liquid spread across the expensive tiles. What happened next would change everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, printed on cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing. You're cordially invited to celebrate Rebecca Martinez's promotion to Regional Director of Operations at Meridian Financial Group. My younger sister had finally made it. After 8 years of climbing the corporate ladder, working 60-hour weeks, and missing countless family dinners, she'd landed the position she'd dreamed about since college. I should have been thrilled for her. Rebecca had always been the ambitious one, the golden child who graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, landed internships at Fortune 500 companies, and networked her way through Chicago's business elite. Growing up, she was the sister who had her life mapped out by age 16, while I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. The celebration was being held at the Riverside Country Club, one of those establishments where membership costs more than most people's annual salary. Rebecca had booked the entire East Wing for the evening, complete with a string quartet, an open bar, and enough hors d'oeuvre to feed a small army. She'd spared no expense, and why shouldn't she? This promotion came with a 6-figure salary bump and a corner office overlooking Lake Michigan. I'd driven down from Milwaukee that afternoon, taking time off from my own job to be there for her big moment. The 2-hour drive gave me plenty of time to think about how different our paths had become. While Rebecca had been building her empire in corporate finance, I'd chosen a quieter route, one that didn't come with champagne celebrations or country club parties. The valet took my keys to my modest Honda Civic, looking slightly puzzled as he parked it between a Mercedes and a BMW. I smoothed down my black dress, the nicest one I owned, purchased specifically for this occasion, and walked through the club's mahogany doors into a world of wealth and influence I'd never quite belonged to. The main reception room buzzed with conversation as Chicago's financial elite mingled over cocktails. I recognized some faces from Rebecca's social media posts, colleagues from Meridian, former classmates from Northwestern, and various other professionals she'd collected in her network over the years. Everyone looked perfectly polished, the men in tailored suits, and the women in designer dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Rebecca spotted me immediately and rushed over, her face glowing with excitement. She looked stunning in a navy blue cocktail dress, her dark hair styled in an elegant updo, diamond earrings catching the light from the crystal chandeliers above. "Patricia, you made it!" She pulled me into a tight hug, and for a moment we were just sisters again, not the successful finance executive and her quieter older sibling. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," I told her, meaning every word. Despite our different paths, I loved my sister fiercely and wanted nothing more than to see her happy. She grabbed my hand and immediately began leading me around the room, introducing me to what felt like half of Chicago's business community. "This is my sister Patricia," she'd say with genuine pride, though I noticed how the conversations always quickly shifted back to Rebecca's achievements, her new role, or the impressive growth metrics she'd delivered in her previous position. I didn't mind fading into the background. I'd grown comfortable with being the supporting character in Rebecca's story. She thrived in these social situations, effortlessly moving from group to group, remembering names and personal details, making everyone feel important and heard. It was a skill I'd never quite mastered. About an hour into the party, Rebecca's husband David found me standing near the appetizer table, trying to look busy while she worked the room. David Chen was everything you'd expect from a successful attorney. Sharp suit, confident handshake, and the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room, even when you knew you weren't. "Patricia, right? Rebecca talks about you all the time," he said, though I suspected that was more politeness than truth. We'd met a handful of times over the 3 years he and Rebecca had been married, usually at holiday gatherings, where the conversation centered around their latest vacation or home renovation project. She's really in her element tonight, I observed, watching Rebecca animate a group of executives with some story about a difficult client acquisition. She is, David agreed, then paused, studying me with those calculating lawyer eyes. What is it you do again? Rebecca mentioned you work in Milwaukee, but I don't think she ever said specifically what. Quote, I work for the state, I replied, keeping my answer deliberately vague. It wasn't that I was ashamed of my job. Quite the opposite. But experience had taught me that certain revelations were better saved for the right moment. David nodded absently, already scanning the room for more important conversations. That's nice. Government work is steady, I suppose. Not glamorous like what Rebecca does, but secure. Before I could respond, a commotion near the bar caught our attention. A group of Rebecca's Meridian colleagues had gathered around someone I didn't recognize. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s, with silver hair and an expensive suit that screamed C-suite executive. Rebecca was practically glowing as she spoke with him, her body language deferential in a way I rarely saw from my confident little sister. That's Harrison Blackwood, David whispered, leaning closer. CEO of Meridian Financial. Rebecca's been trying to get FaceTime with him for months. This promotion might just be the beginning if she plays her cards right. I watched as Rebecca gestured animatedly, clearly pitching herself for something bigger. The CEO listened politely, occasionally nodding, but his expression remained neutral. After a few minutes, he excused himself and moved on to another group, leaving Rebecca looking slightly deflated despite her attempt to maintain her professional smile. The evening continued with the formal announcement of Rebecca's promotion. Harrison Blackwood took the microphone and delivered a polished speech about Rebecca's dedication, her innovative approaches to client relations, and her bright future with the company. Rebecca beamed as he handed her a Crystal Award, and the room erupted in applause. During the applause, I felt genuinely proud of her. She'd worked incredibly hard to get here, sacrificing personal time and relationships to build her career. She deserved this moment of recognition, this celebration of her achievements. But as the evening wore on, I began to notice subtle changes in how people treated me. Once they realized I wasn't part of Chicago's financial world, wasn't a potential business connection or networking opportunity, the conversations became shorter, the smiles more perfunctory. I became background noise in a room full of ambitious professionals, which was fine by me. I'd learned long ago that not every room was meant for every person. The real turning point came during dinner. Rebecca had arranged for assigned seating, and I found myself at a table with David, several of Rebecca's Meridian colleagues, and their spouses. The conversation flowed easily around topics I had little to contribute to. Market projections, client strategies, and office politics I couldn't follow. So Patricia, said Jennifer Walsh, one of Rebecca's colleagues, turning to me with the kind of smile people use when they're being polite but not particularly interested. David mentioned you work for the state. What department? The judicial branch, I replied simply. Jennifer nodded as if she understood, though her expression suggested she didn't find it particularly fascinating. That must be stable work. There was something in her tone, a subtle condescension that suggested she viewed government work as something people did when they couldn't make it in the private sector. I'd encountered this attitude before, particularly in rooms like this one, where success was measured primarily in salary figures and stock options. The tension at our dinner table grew thicker as the evening progressed. Marcus Thompson, Rebecca's supervisor at Meridian, had clearly had too much to drink. His face was flushed, his tie loosened, and his filter completely gone. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing broadly with his wine glass as he held court over our section of the dining room. You know what I love about this industry? Marcus slurred slightly, his Chicago accent becoming more pronounced with each sip. It's pure meritocracy. You either produce results or you don't. No participation trophies, no government handouts, just raw talent and hard work. His wife Linda touched his arm gently. Marcus, maybe we should. No, I'm making a point here, he interrupted, waving her off. Look at Rebecca, perfect example. Started at the bottom, worked her way up, earned every promotion. That's the American dream right there. Rebecca smiled graciously, though I could see the slight tightness around her eyes that meant she was getting uncomfortable. She'd always been good at reading a room, and even in her moment of triumph, she could sense where this conversation was heading. Marcus turned his bloodshot gaze toward me. Now Patricia here, she went the safe route. Government job, steady paycheck, probably great benefits. Nothing wrong with that, but let's be honest. It's not exactly pushing boundaries, is it? The table went quiet. Jennifer Walsh studied her salmon intently, while her husband Richard suddenly found his water glass fascinating. David cleared his throat, clearly wanting to change the subject, but not quite knowing how. I mean, what do you actually do all day? Marcus continued, oblivious to the discomfort he was causing. Push papers, stamp forms. Must be nice having that job security, knowing you can't really get fired no matter how little you accomplish. Marcus, Rebecca said firmly, her professional smile strained. Maybe we should talk about something else. But Marcus was just getting started. The alcohol had loosened whatever professional restraints he normally maintained, and something about my presence seemed to have triggered a need to establish some kind of hierarchy. Maybe it was because I was the only person at the table who wasn't part of his world, the only one who hadn't spent the evening impressed by his stories about closing million-dollar deals. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I'm just saying, he continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, there's a difference between people who create value and people who just exist in the system. No offense, Patricia, but when's the last time a government employee actually innovated anything? When's the last time someone in your position took a real risk or made a decision that actually mattered? I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I'd encountered this attitude before. The assumption that government work was somehow lesser, that public service was what people did when they couldn't make it in the real world. Usually I let it slide. Usually it wasn't worth the argument. But something about this moment, about watching Marcus belittle not just my career but the very concept of public service while celebrating Rebecca's achievements, made my jaw clench. You'd be surprised, I said quietly. Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that carried across our corner of the room. Come on, Patricia, be honest. How much real responsibility do you actually have? What's the most important decision they let you make? What color ink to use on forms? David shot me an apologetic look, clearly embarrassed by his friend's behavior but not willing to confront him directly. Rebecca had gone pale, her celebration dinner turning into a nightmare scenario she had no idea how to navigate. The rest of the table seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they weren't witnessing this increasingly uncomfortable exchange. I could practically feel their collective wish that I would just laugh it off, make some self-deprecating joke, and let Marcus have his moment of superiority. Instead, I set down my fork and looked him directly in the eye. I make decisions every day that affect thousands of people's lives, I said, my voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone at the table pay attention. I deal with cases involving everything from corporate fraud to constitutional rights. The choices I make can determine whether someone spends decades in prison or walks free, whether a family keeps their home or loses everything they've worked for. Marcus's smirk faltered slightly, but his alcohol-fueled confidence kept him going. Okay, so you're what? A paralegal? Court clerk? Those are important jobs, sure, but let's not pretend you're actually making those big decisions. You're probably just filing paperwork for someone else who actually has the authority. That's when something inside me snapped. Not dramatically. I didn't raise my voice or slam my hand on the table. But something shifted, a decision made in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Actually, I said, my voice carrying the quiet authority I used in my professional life, I am the one making those decisions. The table went completely silent. Even the ambient noise from the other dinner conversations seemed to fade as everyone focused on our exchange. Marcus blinked, his wine-addled brain trying to process what I just said. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. I don't file paperwork for someone else's decisions. I don't stamp forms or push papers around a desk. I make the final call on cases that determine people's fates, that set legal precedents, that shape how justice is administered in this state. Rebecca was staring at me with wide eyes, suddenly realizing where this conversation was heading. She'd always known the basics of my job, but we'd never discussed the details, never talked about the weight of responsibility that came with my position. "Patricia," she said softly, a warning in her voice. But I was done hiding. Done letting people like Marcus assume that government service meant incompetence or irrelevance. Done pretending that my career was somehow less meaningful than manipulating financial markets for wealthy clients. "You want to know about real responsibility, Marcus?" I continued, my voice still calm but with steel underneath. "Try deciding whether a mother who stole formula for her hungry baby deserves jail time or community service. Try balancing the rights of victims against the constitutional protections of the accused. Try writing opinions that will be studied in law schools for decades, that will influence how justice is administered long after you and I are gone." Marcus's face had gone from flushed to pale. His swagger was evaporating as quickly as the alcohol in his system, replaced by a growing awareness that he might have seriously misjudged the situation. "You're a lawyer?" Jennifer Walsh asked, speaking for the first time in several minutes. "Among other things," I replied, still focused on Marcus, who was now looking distinctly uncomfortable in his expensive suit. The silence stretched out, broken only by the soft clink of silverware against china from neighboring tables. Rebecca looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, torn between pride in her sister and mortification at how her celebration dinner had derailed. David was the first to find his voice. "Patricia, had no idea you were." "Where's what?" I interrupted gently. "Important enough to matter? Successful enough to deserve respect? Accomplished enough to be worth listening to?" He flushed, realizing how his earlier dismissiveness must have sounded in light of this revelation. Marcus mumbled something that might have been an apology, but his words were too slurred and quiet to make out clearly. He reached for his wine glass with shaking hands, clearly needing liquid courage to figure out how to extract himself from the hole he'd dug. The evening had taken a turn none of us had expected, least of all me. I'd come to celebrate Rebecca's success, not to defend my own career choices or engage in a battle of professional credentials. But sometimes life forces your hand, demands that you stand up for yourself, even when you'd rather stay in the background. And this was just the beginning. The atmosphere in the dining room had shifted dramatically. Word of the confrontation at our table seemed to ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. I could feel eyes on us now, conversations pausing mid-sentence as people tried to figure out what had just happened, and why Marcus Thompson looked like he'd seen a ghost. Rebecca attempted damage control, her public relations instincts kicking in despite her obvious discomfort. "Why don't we all just take a breath and—" "No, Rebecca," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I think it's time people understood exactly what kind of work some of us do in government service." Marcus had gone completely quiet, staring down at his plate like it might provide some escape route from the situation he'd created. His wife Linda kept shooting him sharp looks that promised a very uncomfortable car ride home. Jennifer Walsh, clearly sensing an opportunity to salvage something from this social disaster, leaned forward with renewed interest. "Patricia, I apologize if we seemed dismissive. I think we all just assumed. Well, when people say they work for the state, it usually means you think they're bureaucrats pushing meaningless paperwork." I finished for her. "I understand the assumption. I've encountered it countless times over the years." "So what exactly do you do?" Richard Walsh asked, his tone more respectful now that he realized his earlier condescension might have been misplaced. I glanced around the table, taking in their expectant faces. Rebecca looked nervous, as if she was afraid I might say something that would somehow reflect poorly on her or derail her celebration further. David appeared genuinely curious, though I could see him mentally recalculating everything he thought he knew about his wife's quiet sister. "I serve on the Wisconsin Supreme Court," I said simply. The words landed like a physical blow. Jennifer Walsh's fork clattered against her plate. Richard choked on his wine. Marcus looked up from his plate with an expression of pure horror as the full implications of his earlier comments hit him. "You're a Supreme Court justice?" David whispered, his lawyer brain immediately grasping what that meant. "Chief Justice, actually," I corrected gently. "For the past 3 years." The silence that followed was deafening. In a room full of successful professionals who prided themselves on their achievements and status, I had just revealed that I held one of the most powerful judicial positions in the state. While they were impressing each other with sales figures and client acquisitions, I was interpreting constitutional law and shaping legal precedent for millions of people. Rebecca's mouth had fallen open. Patricia, why didn't you ever tell me? I mean, I knew you were a judge, but Chief Justice? That's incredible. I looked at my sister with a mixture of affection and sadness. When would I have told you? When you were telling me about your latest promotion? Your new office? Your salary increase? There never seemed to be room in our conversations for my career updates. The truth was more complicated than that, of course. I'd always been protective of Rebecca's achievements, never wanting to overshadow her successes with my own. She'd worked so hard to build her career in finance, and I knew how much validation meant to her. The last thing I wanted was to make her feel like her accomplishments were somehow diminished by comparison. But sitting here, watching these people who'd spent the evening treating me like an irrelevant appendage to Rebecca's story, I realized that my protective instincts had gone too far. In trying to be supportive, I'd allowed myself to be marginalized, to be seen as less than I was. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I never meant to. To what? I interrupted, my judicial training keeping my voice level despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. To dismiss an entire branch of government as meaningless? To assume that public service is somehow inferior to private enterprise? To suggest that the people who dedicate their lives to upholding justice and constitutional rights are just lazy bureaucrats? He flinched with each point, his face growing paler by the second. The alcohol that had made him so bold earlier was now working against him, amplifying his embarrassment and making it impossible to mount any kind of coherent defense. The decisions I make don't just affect profit margins or quarterly reports, I continued, my voice carrying the authority I wielded every day on the bench. They determine whether constitutional rights are protected or eroded, whether justice is accessible to everyone or just those who can afford the best lawyers, whether the rule of law means something or becomes just another commodity to be bought and sold. Jennifer Walsh had tears in her eyes. Whether from embarrassment or genuine remorse, I couldn't tell. Justice Patricia, I am so deeply sorry. We had no right to assume. You had every right to your assumptions, I said, cutting her off, but you also had the responsibility to examine those assumptions before voicing them so confidently. The revelation was spreading beyond our table now. I could see people throughout the dining room whispering, phones discreetly appearing as people looked up information about Wisconsin's Chief Justice. Someone had clearly connected the dots because I caught fragments of urgent conversations. That's her. Chief Justice Patricia. Oh my God, Marcus said what? Rebecca looked mortified, but I could also see something else in her expression, a dawning pride mixed with confusion about why I'd never shared this information more openly. Patricia, I don't understand. Why didn't you ever correct people when they made assumptions about your job? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself throughout this entire evening. Because I was taught that true confidence doesn't need to announce itself, I said. Because I believed that my work should speak for itself, regardless of whether people in country clubs knew about it. Because I thought it was more important to support your achievements than to compete with them. David was shaking his head in disbelief. Do you realize what this means? Do you know how many people in this room would kill for 5 minutes of your time? The connections, the influence, the respect you command in legal circles? I'm not interested in leveraging my position for social status, I replied. I didn't become a judge to impress people at cocktail parties. But even as I said it, I realized something had changed in me tonight. The protective shell I'd built around my professional identity had cracked, and I wasn't sure I wanted to repair it. Maybe it was time to stop hiding in plain sight, to stop allowing people to underestimate the importance of public service and the dedication required to do it well. Marcus had managed to compose himself enough to speak again, though his voice shook with the effort. Chief Justice, I cannot express how deeply I regret my comments. I was completely out of line and You were honest, I interrupted. Inappropriately so, and under the influence of too much wine, but honest nonetheless. You revealed attitudes that are more common than you might think, assumptions that diminish the value of public service and the people who choose it. The weight of the moment was settling over everyone at the table. This wasn't just about one man's drunken rudeness anymore. It had become a reckoning with deeper prejudices and assumptions about worth, success, and the different ways people choose to serve society. Rebecca reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "I've always been proud of you, but I think I never really understood what you do, how important it is." "It's not more important than what you do," I replied. "We all serve society in different ways. The problem comes when we assume that some forms of service are more valuable than others." But as I looked around the table at these successful, ambitious people who were now viewing me with a mixture of awe and newfound respect, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The news of my identity spread through the Riverside Country Club like wildfire. Within minutes of my revelation at the dinner table, I could feel the entire energy of the room shifting. Conversations that had been flowing naturally suddenly became stilted and awkward as people processed the fact that Wisconsin's Chief Justice had been sitting quietly in their midst all evening, enduring condescending comments about government work. Harrison Blackwood, the Meridian Financial CEO, who had given Rebecca her promotion speech earlier, appeared at our table as if materialized from thin air. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes as he processed this unexpected development. "Chief Justice Brennan," he said, extending his hand with the kind of respect he'd reserve for a federal senator or Fortune 500 CEO. "I had no idea we were graced with such distinguished company this evening." The formality of his address created another ripple of awareness through the nearby tables. People were no longer pretending not to listen to our conversation. They were openly staring now, phones appearing as guests discreetly Googled my name and judicial record. "Mr. Blackwood," I replied, accepting his handshake but remaining seated. "Please, just Patricia. This is Rebecca's evening, not mine." But even as I said it, I knew the evening had fundamentally changed. Rebecca's promotion celebration had transformed into something else entirely, a moment where assumptions about power, influence, and social hierarchy were being violently re-examined. Rebecca herself looked caught between pride and panic. On one hand, her sister had just revealed herself to be one of the most powerful legal minds in the state. On the other hand, the carefully orchestrated celebration of her own achievements was rapidly being overshadowed by something much more dramatic. "Chief Justice," Harrison continued, his voice carrying across the room in a way that made it clear he wanted others to hear, "I hope you'll forgive the presumption, but I'd love to arrange a meeting sometime. Meridian Financial has been following several cases making their way through the state court system, and your perspectives on business regulation and constitutional commerce law would be invaluable." It was a transparent attempt to curry favor, to establish some kind of connection with someone whose decisions could potentially affect his company's operations. I'd seen it countless times before. The moment people discovered my position, their entire demeanor shifted from casual dismissal to calculated interest. "I'm sure you understand that I can't discuss pending cases or provide preview opinions on matters that might come before the court," I replied diplomatically. Of course," Harrison nodded vigorously. "I simply meant in a more general, educational context. Perhaps you'd be interested in speaking at one of our quarterly leadership summits. I'm sure our executives would be fascinated to hear about the intersection of law and business from someone with your expertise." Marcus Thompson, meanwhile, had apparently decided that the best strategy for dealing with his earlier humiliation was to disappear entirely. He'd been gradually sinking lower in his chair throughout this exchange, and now he mumbled something about needing fresh air before practically fleeing the dining room. His wife Linda shot me an apologetic look before hurrying after him. "Actually," Rebecca said, her voice cutting through the sudden attention being lavished on me, "I think we're getting a bit off track here. This is supposed to be a celebration of achievements in the financial sector, not a judicial seminar." There was an edge to her tone that I recognized from childhood, the frustration of the younger sister who felt overshadowed, whose moment in the spotlight was being stolen by circumstances beyond her control. I felt a pang of guilt, realizing that my decision to reveal my position had inadvertently hijacked her celebration. But Harrison Blackwood seemed oblivious to Rebecca's discomfort. He was in full networking mode now. The kind of aggressive relationship building that had probably helped him climb to the CEO position. Rebecca, you're absolutely right, and congratulations again on your promotion. But surely you must be incredibly proud of your sister's accomplishments as well? Having a Chief Justice in the family must provide some fascinating dinner conversation. We don't really discuss work at family gatherings, Rebecca replied stiffly, and I could hear years of slight resentment in those words. How many times had she wanted to share her own professional victories, only to feel like they paled in comparison to constitutional law and Supreme Court decisions? Jennifer Walsh, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since my revelation, finally found her voice again. Chief Justice, I have to ask, and please forgive my ignorance, but how does someone become Chief Justice? Is it elected? Appointed? I'm embarrassed to admit I don't really understand the process. Quote, it was actually a thoughtful question, the kind that showed genuine interest rather than just social posturing. In Wisconsin, Supreme Court justices are elected to 10-year terms, I explained. The Chief Justice position rotates based on seniority, so I became chief when my predecessor's term ended. It's not something you campaign for specifically, it comes with time and experience on the court. And before that? David asked, his lawyer's curiosity finally overcoming his social awkwardness. What was your path to the court? I spent 15 years as a circuit court judge, handling everything from family law to criminal cases to complex civil litigation. Before that, I was in private practice for 8 years, mostly defense work and some civil rights cases. As I outlined my career trajectory, I could see the people around the table doing mental calculations, realizing that every assumption they'd made about my professional competence had been not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. The steady government job they'd dismissed so casually represented decades of legal expertise and judicial experience. The civil rights work must have been particularly meaningful, Harrison observed, clearly trying to demonstrate his own progressive credentials. Were you involved in any landmark cases? Several, I replied without elaborating. I wasn't interested in turning this into a resume recitation, especially not at my sister's expense. But my reticence seemed to only increase the fascination. Other people from nearby tables were now openly approaching, introducing themselves and attempting to engage me in conversation. Word had spread through the club's dining room that Wisconsin's Chief Justice was in attendance, and suddenly everyone wanted to be part of the story. Rebecca watched this parade of attention with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was pride there, certainly, but also something that looked like resignation. She'd worked so hard for this evening, this recognition of her own achievements, and now it was being eclipsed by revelations about her sister's far more significant position. You know what? Rebecca said suddenly, standing up from the table. I think I need some air. She walked away before anyone could respond, leaving the rest of us sitting in awkward silence. David looked torn between following his wife and staying to continue what had become an impromptu meet and greet with a Supreme Court justice. I made the decision for him. Excuse me, I said, rising from my chair. I should go check on Rebecca. As I walked away from the table, I could hear the buzz of conversation resuming behind me, people dissecting what had just happened and probably speculating about family dynamics they couldn't possibly understand. But my focus was on finding my sister and somehow salvaging what was supposed to be her special evening. I found her on the club's outdoor terrace, leaning against the marble balustrade and staring out at the Chicago skyline. The lights of the city stretched endlessly in both directions, a glittering testament to ambition and success. She didn't turn around when I approached, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Hell of a way to celebrate a promotion, she said without looking at me. The Chicago skyline glittered before us, but I could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air between Rebecca and me. The terrace was mercifully empty, giving us privacy from the chaos I'd inadvertently created inside. I'm sorry, I said, moving to stand beside her at the railing. This wasn't how your evening was supposed to go. Rebecca let out a bitter laugh. You know what the funny thing is? I'm not even surprised. Somehow, even when it's supposed to be my moment, you manage to steal the show without even trying. Her words hit me like a physical blow. That's not what I was trying to do. I know, she said, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and I could see years of accumulated frustration written across her face. That's what makes it worse. You don't even realize you're doing it. The accusation hung between us, and I found myself struggling to process it. Rebecca, I've spent years stepping back, letting you have the spotlight. I came tonight to celebrate you, to support your achievement. And then you dropped a bomb that made everyone forget I exist, she replied, her voice cracking slightly. Do you have any idea what it's like being your sister? Do you know how it feels to work 80-hour weeks, to sacrifice everything for a career, only to find out that your quiet, unassuming older sister is secretly more successful than you could ever dream of being? I stared at her, genuinely shocked. Rebecca, your career is incredible. What you've accomplished. What have I accomplished? She interrupted, her composure finally cracking. I'm a regional director at a mid-sized financial firm. You're the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. You make decisions that affect millions of people. You're quoted in law journals. You're a constitutional scholar. And I help rich people get richer. The pain in her voice was raw and immediate, and I realized that my attempts to be supportive over the years had been fundamentally misguided. I'd thought I was being humble, staying in the background to let her shine. Instead, I'd been inadvertently patronizing her, treating her achievements as fragile things that needed protection from comparison. Your work matters, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded hollow given the circumstances. Does it? Rebecca asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Because sitting in there tonight, watching those people's reactions when they found out who you really are, I realized something. All this time, you've been letting me think we were equals, letting me feel proud of my little victories, while you hold back this massive secret that changes everything. It's not a secret, I protested. It's just, I don't know, I never thought it was relevant to our relationship as sisters. Not relevant? Rebecca's voice rose slightly before she caught herself and lowered it again. Patricia, you've been treating me like a child, like someone who couldn't handle knowing the truth about your success. Do you realize how condescending that is? I felt something cold settle in my stomach as her words sank in. She was right. In my desire to protect her feelings, I'd been making decisions about what she could and couldn't handle, what she did and didn't need to know. I'd been managing our relationship based on my own assumptions about her fragility. I never meant it that way, I said quietly. I know you didn't, Rebecca replied, her anger giving way to something sadder and more complex. That's what makes this so frustrating. You're not malicious, Patricia. You're so used to being the responsible one, the protector, that you forgot I'm an adult who can handle difficult truths. A group of guests spilled out onto the terrace, their laughter and animated conversation a sharp contrast to the heavy moment Rebecca and I were sharing. They noticed us and quickly retreated back inside, but their brief presence reminded us both that we weren't alone in this bubble of family drama. I keep thinking about all those family dinners, Rebecca continued, her voice softer now. All those times you asked about my work, seemed so interested in my promotions and achievements. Was that a pity? Were you humoring me? No, I said immediately, the word coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. Rebecca, I am genuinely proud of what you've built. The fact that my career took a different path doesn't diminish your accomplishments. But it puts them in perspective, doesn't it? She asked. When I got promoted to regional director, I called you so excited. I probably talked for 20 minutes about the salary increase and the corner office. And you listened and congratulated me, knowing that your starting salary as a circuit judge was probably higher than what I'd just worked 8 years to achieve. I wanted to deny it, but the math was uncomfortably accurate. Judicial salaries were matters of public record, and Rebecca was clearly intelligent enough to have looked them up by now. Money isn't everything, I said, but the words felt inadequate even as I spoke them. You're right, it's not, Rebecca agreed, but influence is something. Respect is something. The ability to shape society, to make decisions that matter, that's something significant. And while I've been celebrating moving numbers around on spreadsheets, you've been interpreting the Constitution. The comparison stung because there was truth in it. Not that Rebecca's work was meaningless. The financial sector played a crucial role in the economy, but the scope and impact of our respective careers were fundamentally different. I chose my path because it felt right for me, I said. You chose yours for the same reason, That doesn't make either choice wrong. But it makes them unequal, Rebecca pointed out. And the fact that you've been pretending otherwise for years, it feels dishonest, Patricia. It feels like you've been managing me. The word managing hit particularly hard because that's exactly what I'd been doing, without even realizing it. I'd been managing Rebecca's feelings, managing our family dynamics, managing the flow of information to maintain some artificial balance that existed only in my own mind. What do you want me to do? I asked, genuinely uncertain how to move forward from this revelation. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but sad. I want you to stop protecting me from reality. I want you to trust me enough to be honest about who you are and what you've achieved. I want you to stop treating me like I'm too weak or insecure to handle having a successful sister. And I want, she continued, her voice gaining strength, to figure out how to be proud of you without feeling diminished by you. Because right now, I don't know how to do that. The honesty of her admission cut through all the polite deflection and careful emotional management that had characterized our relationship for years. We were finally talking about the real dynamics between us, the unspoken hierarchies and assumptions that had shaped our interactions. I don't know how to do that either, I admitted. I've been so focused on not overshadowing you that I forgot to just be your sister. That's the thing, though, Rebecca said, turning to face me fully. You can't not overshadow me. Your career is objectively more significant than mine. The question is whether we can build a relationship that acknowledges that reality, without letting it poison everything between us. It was a mature observation, one that showed she'd been thinking about our family dynamics far more deeply than I'd given her credit for. Once again, I'd underestimated her capacity to handle complex truths. I'd like to try, I said. So would I, Rebecca replied. But it means you have to stop hiding who you are. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it might make me feel small sometimes. We stood in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of what had just been said. Inside the club, I could hear the continued buzz of conversation, probably still focused on the evening's unexpected revelation. But out here on the terrace, Rebecca and I had finally begun to address the real issues that had been simmering beneath the surface of our relationship for years. When Rebecca and I finally returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had begun as an elegant corporate celebration now resembled something closer to a political fundraiser, with clusters of people positioned strategically around our abandoned table, clearly hoping for an opportunity to approach me. David spotted us immediately and hurried over, relief evident on his face. There you are. I was starting to worry you'd both disappeared entirely. Just needed some air, Rebecca said, her professional smile back in place, though I could see the strain behind it. How are things progressing in here? Quote, Well, David said, glancing around the room nervously, Harrison Blackwood has been holding court at the bar, telling anyone who'll listen about his conversation with the Chief Justice. Marcus Thompson left about 10 minutes ago. Apparently he wasn't feeling well, and Jennifer Walsh has been asking everyone if they knew about Patricia's position beforehand. Rebecca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Even our brief absence had allowed the focus to shift further away from her promotion and toward the more sensational story of the secret Supreme Court justice at Table 7. I should probably make my rounds, I said quietly. Say goodbye to a few people and then head back to Milwaukee. This evening has gone on long enough. You can't leave yet, a voice interrupted from behind us. We turned to find Harrison Blackwood approaching with two other men I didn't recognize, both clearly executives based on their expensive suits and confident bearing. Chief Justice Brennan, Harrison continued, I'd like you to meet Thomas Crawford, CEO of Crawford Industries, and Michael Rodriguez, senior partner at Rodriguez, Klein & Associates. Gentlemen, this is Chief Justice Patricia Brennan of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The introductions felt choreographed, as if Harrison had been orchestrating this moment since learning my identity. Both men extended their hands with the kind of eager respect reserved for people who could potentially influence their business interests. Chief Justice, Thomas Crawford said, his grip lingering a moment too long, what an unexpected pleasure. I have to say, Harrison was just telling us about your extensive background in civil rights law. Crawford Industries has been following the employment discrimination cases working their way through the state court system with great interest. It was a transparent fishing expedition, an attempt to gauge my judicial philosophy on matters that might affect his company's bottom line. I'd encountered this approach countless times. Business leaders trying to extract preview opinions or insights that might give them an edge in pending litigation. Mr. Crawford, I replied diplomatically, I'm sure you understand that I can't discuss cases that might come before the court, either directly or indirectly. Of course, he said quickly, though his disappointment was obvious. I simply meant to express our appreciation for the careful consideration the court gives to balancing workers' rights with business practicalities. Michael Rodriguez jumped into the conversation before I could respond. Chief Justice, as someone who practices employment law regularly, I have to say your recent opinion in the Henderson case was masterfully written. The way you balanced constitutional protections with statutory requirements, truly elegant legal reasoning. Unlike Crawford's obvious attempt at influence peddling, Rodriguez's comment demonstrated actual familiarity with my judicial work. The Henderson case had indeed been complex, involving the intersection of religious freedom and workplace discrimination, and it had taken months to craft an opinion that protected individual rights while providing clear guidance for employers. Thank you, I said, genuinely appreciating the professional recognition. That case presented some fascinating constitutional questions. The legal community has been talking about it for months, Rodriguez continued. The way you distinguished it from the Federal Circuit Court decisions was particularly insightful. Have you considered publishing any academic articles based on your judicial philosophy? I know several law reviews would be honored to. Excuse me, Rebecca interrupted, her voice carrying a sharp edge that made everyone turn to look at her. I hate to break up this legal symposium, but I believe we're supposed to be celebrating something else tonight. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Harrison Blackwood looked confused, as if he'd forgotten entirely that this was Rebecca's promotion party. Crawford and Rodriguez appeared embarrassed, suddenly realizing they'd been treating the evening like an impromptu judicial conference rather than a private celebration. Rebecca, you're absolutely right, I said quickly, recognizing the frustration building in my sister's voice. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure meeting you, but I think it's time I let you get back to celebrating the real star of this evening. But the damage was already done. The easy flow of conversation that had characterized the early part of the evening was gone, replaced by an awkward awareness that everyone was navigating uncharted social territory. How do you return to discussing quarterly earnings and client acquisitions when you've just discovered that one of your dinner companions shapes constitutional law for a living? Rebecca's colleague Jennifer Walsh approached hesitantly, clearly struggling with how to address me now that my position had been revealed. Chief Justice, Patricia, Rebecca, I just wanted to say again how excited we all are about your promotion. This is such a significant achievement for you and for Meridian. The attempt to redirect attention back to Rebecca was well-intentioned but felt forced, like adults trying to include a child in grown-up conversation. Rebecca's smile grew tighter as she thanked Jennifer for the kind words. Actually, Rebecca said, her voice gaining strength, I think Patricia's right. This evening has run its course. I should probably start thanking people for coming and wrapping things up. There was something final in her tone, a decision being made in real time. This wasn't the celebration she'd planned, and trying to salvage it now would only make things more awkward for everyone involved. Are you sure? David asked, clearly concerned about the impression this might make on Rebecca's colleagues and superiors. Harrison was talking about making another toast, and I think some people are still arriving. I'm sure, Rebecca said firmly. Sometimes you have to know when to end on a high note. Over the next 30 minutes, we watched Rebecca gracefully wind down her own celebration. She moved through the room, thanking guests for attending, accepting congratulations on her promotion, and deflecting questions about her famous sister with practiced diplomacy. It was a masterclass in professional composure under difficult circumstances. Harrison Blackwood made one final attempt to corner me near the coat check, producing a business card and suggesting we schedule a meeting to discuss areas of mutual interest. I accepted the card politely but made no commitments, having learned long ago that mixing judicial independence with corporate networking was a dangerous game. As the last guests filtered out of the dining room, Rebecca and I found ourselves alone at our table, surrounded by the detritus of what should have been her triumphant evening. Empty champagne glasses, crumpled napkins, and the Crystal Award that had been temporarily forgotten in all the excitement. "Well," Rebecca said, picking up the award and examining it in the soft light from the chandeliers above. "That certainly didn't go as planned." "I'm sorry," I said again, knowing the words were inadequate but not knowing what else to offer. "Stop apologizing," Rebecca replied, but her tone was gentler than it had been earlier. "You didn't do anything wrong. You just existed. The problem is that your existence is apparently more newsworthy than my promotion." She set the award down carefully and looked around the empty dining room. "You know what's funny? 6 months ago, I would have been devastated by this. The idea that my big moment got overshadowed would have ruined everything for me. And now?" I asked. "Now I'm realizing that maybe my self-worth shouldn't depend on being the most impressive person in the room," she said. "Maybe it's okay to be proud of what I've accomplished, even if it's not going to make headlines or impress Supreme Court justices." It was a moment of genuine growth, a recognition that success didn't have to be relative or competitive. But I could also hear the exhaustion in her voice, the emotional toll of having her celebration become something entirely different than what she'd envisioned. "Your accomplishments do impress me," I said quietly. "They always have. Not because I was patronizing you, but because building a career in finance requires skills I don't possess. You navigate complex client relationships, manage teams, analyze markets. None of that comes naturally to me." Rebecca looked at me with something approaching surprise. "Really?" "Really," I confirmed. "I can interpret constitutional law and write judicial opinions, but ask me to put together a business proposal or manage a corporate restructuring, and I'd be completely lost." 3 months later, I sat in my chambers at the Wisconsin Supreme Court, reviewing briefs for the afternoon's oral arguments when my assistant knocked on the door. "Chief Justice, you have a visitor," she announced. "Your sister Rebecca is here." I looked up in surprise. Rebecca had never visited me at work before. In fact, she'd never even seen the inside of the state capitol building where my chambers were located. Our relationship since the promotion dinner had been cordial but careful, both of us still navigating the new honesty we'd committed to that night on the terrace. "Send her in," I said, closing the brief I'd been reading. Rebecca entered wearing a sharp navy suit I didn't recognize, carrying herself with the confidence I'd always admired, but somehow seeming different, more grounded, less performative. She looked around my chambers with genuine curiosity, taking in the floor-to-ceiling law books, the portraits of former justices, and the simple wooden desk where some of the state's most important legal decisions were crafted. "Impressive," she said, settling into one of the leather chairs across from my desk. "Very judicial, very you. What brings you to Madison?" I asked, genuinely curious. Rebecca rarely made spontaneous trips, especially during business hours. "I quit my job," she said, without preamble. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "You what?" "I quit Meridian Financial. Gave my notice 2 weeks ago. Worked my final day yesterday." She leaned back in the chair, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. Harrison Blackwood was not pleased. "Rebecca, why? You worked so hard for that promotion, and the regional director position was everything you wanted." "Was it?" she interrupted, but not unkindly. "Or was it everything I thought I was supposed to want?" Because after that disaster of a promotion party, I started asking myself some uncomfortable questions about what I was actually building with my life. I set down my pen, giving her my full attention. This wasn't the Rebecca I knew, the sister who had every aspect of her career mapped out, who measured success in salary increases and corner offices. "The week after the party, Harrison kept calling me into meetings," she continued. "Suddenly, everyone at Meridian was fascinated by my family connections. They wanted to know if you might be interested in speaking at corporate events, if I could arrange introductions with other judges, if there were ways the firm could leverage my relationship with the Chief Justice." I felt a familiar anger rising. They wanted to use you to get to me. Exactly. And at first, I was furious. Not at you, but at them for reducing me to nothing more than a networking opportunity. But then I realized something even more disturbing. Part of me was actually considering it. Part of me was thinking that maybe this was finally my chance to be the impressive sister, The one with the valuable connections. She paused, looking out the tall windows of my chambers toward the state capitol grounds. That's when I knew I had to make a change. I didn't want to be successful because of who my sister is. I wanted to build something that was entirely my own. So what's your plan? I asked, both worried and intrigued. Rebecca's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. I'm starting a nonprofit. Financial literacy and planning services for low-income families. There's this huge gap in the market. People who can't afford traditional financial advisors, but desperately need help, understanding everything from basic banking to retirement planning. The idea was brilliant, and so perfectly Rebecca, that I wondered why she hadn't thought of it years earlier. She'd always been naturally gifted at explaining complex financial concepts, and she genuinely cared about helping people build better lives for themselves. I've been researching it for months, she continued, her enthusiasm building. There are federal grants available, potential partnerships with community organizations, even some initial interest from a few impact investors. I've got meetings lined up with 3 different foundations next week. Rebecca, that's incredible, I said, and meant it completely. But starting a nonprofit is a huge risk. The steady salary, the benefits, the career security you built at Meridian. We'll all be there if this doesn't work out, she finished. Patricia, I'm 34 years old. If I don't take a risk now, when will I? Besides, I've been thinking about what you said that night about different forms of service. Maybe it's time I tried serving something bigger than quarterly profit margins. I studied my sister's face, seeing a determination and clarity that had been missing for years. The Rebecca sitting across from me wasn't the ambitious corporate climber who'd been so devastated when her promotion party went sideways. This was someone who'd done the hard work of figuring out what actually mattered to her. What can I do to help? I asked. Actually, Rebecca said, reaching into her briefcase, I was hoping you might review some of the legal documents I've been working on. Articles of incorporation, bylaws, that sort of thing. I know it's not exactly Supreme Court material, but I could use another set of eyes from someone who understands legal language. It was a simple request, but it represented something profound. Rebecca asking for my help as an equal, not as a younger sister seeking approval, but as a professional colleague who respected my expertise. No deference, no self-deprecation, just a straightforward request for assistance. I'd be honored to help, I said, accepting the folder she handed me. And Rebecca, this isn't just a good idea, it's important work. Financial literacy can change entire families' trajectories. Thanks, she said, and I could see that my opinion still mattered to her, but in a healthier way than before. You know, I keep thinking about Marcus Thompson's comments that night, about government employees not taking real risks or making decisions that matter. He was wrong about you, obviously. But he was also wrong about the whole premise. Some of the most important work in society happens outside the private sector. Including what you're planning to do, I pointed out. Exactly. It took me 3 months to realize that I don't need to compete with you or prove that corporate success is somehow superior to public service. We're both just trying to make the world a little better using different tools. We spent the next hour going through her documents, and I was impressed by the thoroughness of her preparation. Rebecca had clearly thrown herself into this new venture with the same intensity she'd brought to her corporate career, but with a sense of purpose that had been missing before. As she was preparing to leave, she paused at the door of my chambers. Patricia, I want to thank you for that disaster of a promotion party. I laughed, despite myself. That's not something I expected to hear. I'm serious. If you hadn't revealed who you really are that night, I might have spent years trying to climb a ladder I didn't actually want to be on. Sometimes it takes a shock to the system to make you reevaluate everything. And Marcus Thompson? I asked. Any word on how he's doing? Rebecca grinned. Oh, he's fine. Still at Meridian, still making inappropriate comments at company events, but Harrison Blackwood apparently had a very serious conversation with him about professional conduct after our party. Turns out insulting Supreme Court justices isn't great for business relationships. 6 months later, I received an invitation printed on recycled paper with simple black lettering. You're invited to the launch celebration for the Community Financial Empowerment Initiative. At the bottom, in Rebecca's handwriting, she'd added, no champagne glasses will be thrown. The launch event was held at a community center on Milwaukee's South Side. Nothing like the elegant country club where we'd last celebrated together. The guests were a mix of social workers, community organizers, foundation representatives, and families who would be served by Rebecca's new organization. There were no networking opportunities with Fortune 500 CEOs, no attempts to leverage connections for business advantage. Rebecca stood at a simple podium, talking about financial dignity and the importance of making banking services accessible to everyone. She looked radiant, speaking with the kind of passion I'd never seen during her corporate presentations. This was work that fed her soul, not just her bank account. When she introduced me to the audience as my sister who taught me that true success means using your talents to serve others, I felt tears prick my eyes. Not because of the recognition, but because I could see that Rebecca had finally found her own path to making a meaningful impact on the world. As the evening wound down, Rebecca and I stood together watching families interact with the financial counselor she'd hired, seeing real people get help with real problems that could change their lives. Any regrets about leaving Meridian? I asked. Only one, Rebecca said with a smile. I should have done this years ago. Sometimes the most important revelations aren't about who we are, but about who we choose to become. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.